Greetings. Um, Name is Rob Prince, and this is the second in a series of Ukraine updates that I want to share with people following uh, the recent Russian invasion of Ukraine, how it's being portrayed here in the United States, what's going on there. There are all kinds of questions that have emerged about it. Today, I really want to look at just two aspects. One is the difficulty in understanding what's happening on the ground from here in the United States, and the second is the person of Ukrainian President Zelensky, who has been projected as some kind of local hero standing up to Russian aggression, and some stuff has come up about him that I think needs discussing. So, first of all, I want to emphasize that I am not someone who knows much about military maneuvers or the status of war or weapon systems and how they're used and maneuvers and all that crap, if you like. There was a time when I did know it, particularly was or tried to be up to date concerning the implementation and the realization of what was called the IMF Treaty in the 1980s, a treaty that resulted in the elimination of U.S. and then Soviet medium-range missiles from both East and Western Europe, which was a real accomplishment at the time. That treaty was recently abandoned by the United States, one of a number of really dangerous signs that has led up to this current conflict. In any case, in any war, it's hard to follow what's going on the ground because you're getting narratives that are shaped by the different sides and finding out actually what transpiring, particularly when, if you like, it's a moving target until the end, and then even after the fighting is over, it usually takes a fair amount of time, 6 months, a year, to tease out what was it that happened, both on the battlefield itself and also the deeper causes, if you like, of the conflict. So what I'm reading now is two narratives that are so diametrically opposed to one another that it's hard to believe that they're talking about the same war. On the one hand, there's the narrative that we're getting here in the United States, and that narrative basically is talking about a heroic Ukrainian resistance that stopped, or maybe not stopped in all of its tracks, but it certainly slowed down a Russian military offensive, that the Russian military offensive is bogged down, and that Russia underestimated the strength of the Ukrainian resistance, that the Russian leadership thought that the Ukrainian military would collapse, and it hasn't collapsed. That narrative, if taken further, looks upon the Russian intervention in Ukraine as a debacle, nothing short of that, which will hurt Russia for years to come, both economically and politically in its role in the world, and that could lead to the fall of the Putin government and of Vladimir Putin himself. All right. I have been from the very outset suspicious of that narrative, because we've seen in the past that the narratives that have led to war, the explanations, narrative perhaps is not a word people understand, but the explanations that have led to war have been either misleading or downright untrue. The classic examples are excuse me, claiming that Saddam Hussein in Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, which was one of the main reasons, and that Saddam was connected at the time to Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda, which was also utter nonsense, and later admitted as such. Then we have the Libyan case, where we were told, where the media was told, the United Nations was told, that there was an imminent genocide about to take place in eastern Libya, and that the Gaddafi government was going to go in and slaughter many, many people. And that also was completely unproven. So listening to the narratives about what how the United States is explaining what's happening in Ukraine, it leaves a lot to be desired, given what we've seen in the past. The other side is the Russian narrative. The Russian narrative is quite different. It explains, or it gives its explanation for the Russian military intervention based on a couple of things. The big thing really is the NATO expansion into Eastern Europe, the elimination of nuclear arms treaty, the ABM treaty, the IMF treaty that I just mentioned, the continual arming and training of Eastern European countries, many of which were either part of the Warsaw Pact or actually part of the Soviet Union itself, like the Baltic states, into NATO, and the possibility now that on the very border of Russia, as close as ever, that Ukraine might join NATO. Add to that the fact that that sometime in the past few years, actually in the past few months, Ukrainian President Zelensky actually requested nuclear weapons for Ukraine. So one is the NATO expansion. The second reason that the Russians have given is the mistreatment of Russian-speaking people in the Donbass area, the two breakaway republics that have taken place, plus the fact that there's been an ongoing war since 2014 against mostly from on the side of the Ukrainian government and army against these breakaway republics. The number of acknowledged people that have died is somewhere around 14,000. Most of those Russian-speaking people in the Donbass, there's not been hardly a peep of criticism of that. So that's the second reason, and the third reason the Russians give is the role that ultra nationalists and actually fascist and pro-Nazi elements in the Ukrainian government since 2014. There are many people who say, "Oh, that's not true," or "it's exaggerated." Or the silliest thing I've heard is, well, how could that be? Because Ukraine has a Jewish president, Zelensky. I didn't know he was Jewish until all this talk came up about it. And that's a little trickier. Unquestionably, these elements exist in Russia. And by the way, they call themselves, particularly there's really a number of them, and there's kind of a range of how ultra-nationalist they are. But the worst of them consider themselves Nazis. This is true of what's referred to as the Azov Brigade, which is really nothing short of a terrorist organization, which has been able to locate itself in very high levels of the Ukrainian military and intelligence apparatus, and in many ways is, despite its small numbers, its influence is powerful, and its backing from the West, NATO, the USA, has been significant. And by that, I mean training, arming, financing, and the like. So those were the reasons that that Russia gave. In terms of what's happening, what we're reading in the news now is that Russia's bogged down. The comparison with Afghanistan is being made. Hillary Clinton made it. She really made it in a very Hillary Clinton-ish, crude manner. From where I'm sitting, the Russian response to that is that they would prefer not going into the cities and getting involved in hand-to-hand urban combat, which would lead to terrible casualties. And so what they've done is that they've surrounded some of the major cities and kind of tightening the noose. It's really similar in my mind when I heard what the strategy was to what they did in Stalingrad, i.e., they try to encircle their military opponents so that they're trapped in what is referred to as a cauldron, and then tighten the noose and hope, because of the inability to break out on the one hand, and the fact that their food and their supplies are running down, that eventually that they'll give up and that this will diminish casualties. What I notice about the reporting from the West is that it talks a lot about what's happening in Kiev, but the real fighting is taking place in the east. It's taking place in the Donbass region, and right now, the real test of strength is in Mariupol, this town which sits on the northeast side of the Black Sea, and is really a strategic center for these ultranationalist Azov Brigade types. And if Russia can break the backbone of that, they've pretty well weakened and disabled the Ukrainian military. And if the Ukrainian military has been disabled and weakened to such a degree, again, as the logic goes, it's possible that the Zelensky government will have no option but to negotiate, and of course to negotiate on Russian terms. So we're in the midst of that. There's fighting going on. There's negotiating going on. My sense from the stuff that I'm trying to read. Oh, we need to keep something else in mind about all this, and that is that there's pretty much of a media blackout of sources coming from Russia itself, from so many sources now have been censored, if you like, and there's no question that in terms of creating and pushing a narrative, or as Chomsky would say, manufacturing consent, that the United States has controlled the narrative, the propaganda about the war. What it looks like from where I'm sitting is that the United States and NATO might have won the battle of public relations, but more and more it looks like that Russia is winning this war in the Ukraine, and decisively so. This morning I read an article by someone I trust greatly and who's been really spot on in so many ways, and that's Andrew Coburn, the British reporter, brother deceased Alexander Coburn, former reporter for The Nation and personal friend. In any case, Coburn is basically challenging the notion that Russia's winning the war, and because it's coming from him, I have to take that seriously. Bottom line in all this, in terms of what's going on the ground, we really don't know what to believe anymore, or I don't know what to believe anymore, and that it's still going to take a couple of weeks to figure out. We won't know until either we see that the Russians are as bogged down as Coburn says, or as I still believe that Russia is actually in a very strong position in the Ukraine. All right. I'm gonna I want to talk about the Zelensky thing a little bit because it's a bit bizarre to me. I started getting emails from friends. Names aren't important, and I'm not going to get into them, but they're long-term friends, many of whom uh, have connections in one way or another with the State Department and with what's going on in Washington D.C. They tend to be quite frankly very sharp. And in the past, something would go on somewhere in the world, and my approach would be, "Hey guys, what's your take on fill in the missing blank? Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, it doesn't matter." Uh, some of them began writing about. First of all, they did not. They did not either know or believe that the Ukrainian government is heavily influenced by these ultra-right pro-fascist elements. They said that this is left propaganda, and one of the sources of one of their arguments was, well, how could this be? Because Zelensky is a president, and Zelensky is Jewish, right? It was at this point, by the way, that I learned that Zelensky was Jewish, because I didn't know that. We go from one crisis to another, and if you're really honest, maybe some general themes about wherever it is, whether it's Kazakhstan or Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria. But as this kind of international conflict moves from one place to another, we don't have to all act like we're experts on everything, because we're not. There are a few, all right. So my sense of, I know something about the Ukraine. I've been there a long time ago. I know its history, its painful history in the 20th century, both in the 1930s, the Stalin purges and starvation, and also the horrors of World War II. But I try to follow it. I try to follow it the best I can. But having said that, I don't get into the details of what's going on in the Ukraine, and so I didn't know that Zelensky was Jewish. All right, so he's Jewish. So what's the big deal? The argument was extended to suggest that because he's Jewish, how could the Ukraine be ultra nationalist, and ultra nationalist in the European sense almost always means anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish. That it's just not possible to have a Jewish president in a country that's leaning in that ultra right direction. Even before I knew the details, that to me was silly. It's a silly argument. And I would note a number of cases where the president is kind of like a token, if you like. He's being used. He's a mouthpiece for more powerful hidden forces. By the way, the first thing that came to mind was actually a Colorado example in the 1920s here in Colorado, where I live. The KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, was extremely strong. One of the strongest KKKs in the country at that time. And they used to boast about having a Jewish lawyer. All right. So there's that. Secondly, think of a number of American presidents that we've had that really were, I wouldn't say brainless, but they weren't chosen for their political sophistication. One was Ronald Reagan. A second was George Bush Jr., W, as he's referred to. And if you look at these administrations, the president really was I mean, what's Reagan's strength? Reagan's strength has always been reading other people's scripts. Uh, uh, George W. Bush ain't much there. Let me tell you. I guess he's good with a chainsaw on his ranch in Texas, but the Bush administration was really run by the vice president, who was the power behind the scenes, Dick Cheney, and who pretty much defined the Bush presidency during its entire 8 years. In Reagan's case, you have figures like Caspar Weinberger, uh, and also some of the figures who would come up later in the Bush years, Rumsfeld and the like. So the idea of having a weak president who doesn't look quite as fanatic, as right wing, as pro fascist, call it what you want, as those who really hold the power, there's nothing new about this. And then, of course, there's the role of Victoria Nuland in the 2014 Maidan uprising, which is co-opted by these right wing elements, who is politically concerned of having a figure that's too associated with the ultra right, and so she looks for a more moderate figure. And so the guy before Zelensky, and Zelensky fit that bill. All right, now let's really remember who's Zelensky is a comedian, right? And from what I have read about him, his comics tend to be rather raunchy, to put it mildly. His cabinet is made up of actors and actresses. So this is not really a serious ruling party. Now, I have a certain sympathy with him, not so much because he's Jewish, but because he's a good guy. And he's a good guy who's way over his head and being pushed very hard in a lot of directions. So from being, and I hate to say this, but my take on something of a clown for most of his presidency, he's now emerging as a kind of a tragic figure who's really caught. He's caught between these right wing elements that really run the Ukraine today, on the one hand, supported by NATO and the United States, and then Russia on the other. And I would be really surprised if he can navigate. Well, there are people who grow in their jobs, and I wish him well. He's just caught really over his head. So my take is really different than all this Jewish. He's Jewish. How could Ukraine, be this ultra right bastion? It's just come on, guys. you know better than that. The interesting thing is there is I wouldn't call it there is a kind of a Jewish connection, and that is that so many of the Russian and Ukrainian Jews who immigrated to Israel and wind up in the settlements in the occupied territories, the illegally occupied territories of occupied Palestine, they're strong supporters of Vladimir Putin. And this has put the Bennett government, the one that has taken over since Netanyahu was relieved of his duties, he finds himself in a bind. On the one hand, there's no way that an Israeli government can go against U.S. policy. It can't. You all know the rest of it: the funding, the military aid, the special relationship. It's just too much. And in fact, the Israeli government did formally issue a statement critical of Russia, for which the Putin government responded with great strength. So there's that. but he's trying to walk. The Prime Minister Bennett is trying to walk a kind of middle line, and in a war where I think of this great statement: "There's nothing in the middle of the road except dead armadillos and yellow lines." So he's caught in a rough situation, Bennett. But what he has tried to do is to negotiate. He's spoken both to Putin and he's spoken to Zelensky. What I glean that he said to Zelensky is, you don't have many cards in your deck, and you should accept Russia's conditions before they get worse. Zelensky wasn't very happy with it. But having said that, this is the role that there are some indications that he's trying to play, and this has been all over the Israeli press. So you want to kind of verify what I'm saying. You just Google the Israeli press, and this will come out. Why Israel is doing it, that's a whole other story. I don't want to get into that right now. In any case, this whole nonsense about Zelensky being Jewish and therefore the Ukrainian government can't be right wing, it's just a bit of hooey. All right, I'm going to stop here, and I will continue every few days commenting on different aspects of what's going on. I do think that over the course of the next 2 weeks, that the situation on the ground is going to become much, much clearer, and we'll see whether Andrew Coburn is right, and that Rob Prince once again is wrong. We'll see how the whole thing plays out. So hope you're all well, and regardless of what your situation is, try to be calm. Try to the best of your ability, see through the narratives that are being thrown at us every day, and come up to your own opinion as to what's happening here and how it can be resolved, of course, in a way that's going to limit war and destruction. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.